is anybody using a technology that is not like, I should say, is it that's outside of like the HTML, CSS, React world? Is anybody doing like Rails or templated sites or anything like that?
Joel was curious about Bootstrap.
Okay, yeah. So Bootstrap would still, it's just a library that would supplement another type of technology. So it would be like, if you, for Bootstrap, if you were using like just HTML, CSS, you can bring in Bootstrap to give you like pre-made snippets of code that you can just plug in to get functionality very quickly. And that same thing works for React. It just works in a different format. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just talk briefly about Bootstrap and Reactstrap. So Bootstrap is a library. It was released by Twitter, and it just provides chunks of code that you can just take and install in your application. And it basically becomes a dependency of your project. So I just threw some like random stuff that I had pre-made in here. Actually, I think I'm just going to make a new one. What am I doing? Let's do that. So you definitely want to use like this version. There's different versions of Bootstrap. I think we're on Bootstrap 4, I believe. But you like make sure that you're aware of like which version you're using. If you like found this on a different site, just check and make sure that the version is the one that you're expecting. And if you look, get started, and we can look at how you install it and the different components that are available. There is, for the most part, it's CSS. There are some things that require JavaScript because there's like actions associated with them. Like if you've ever seen like a carousel on a page and it like scrolls to different images, that scrolling action requires JavaScript because it's more than just Markdown. And so if you need those, then you'll have to install these script tags. But they're just regular script tags, just like we see in like the dependencies for React or something. You just have to plug them in your application. But the easiest way to just do the CSS is to just copy this dependency into the head of your HTML project. And so just like if you were installing a style sheet or like a Google font or any of the things that require an additional file, you just add that resource into the head. Portfolio. So once you've made that connection, we can just go and look at the different components. And let's see, we can get alerts. And it just gives us all of this code. Let's do like a nav or something. Let's do a Jumbotron. Those are very apparently there. So it's just like a giant header on top of your project. I like ones that don't have buttons, but you could also add in nav buttons. And basically this just gives you code that if you copy it and put this into your app, what you get is the thing that's featured. And it works by having classes that are specifically Bootstrap classes that add stylings kind of behind the scenes. So you don't actually have to put in the stylings itself. That link in the head will take care of it. It does give you a lot of code, so keeping it organized is important because you just get a bunch of nested tags that all have different stylings. And so the challenge is really like tracking what you get from Bootstrap. Now I guess I should move my title, my header, but anyway, I have my H1 up top and then I have my Jumbotron. I'll probably do a little editing to clean that up, but it just basically allows me to like plug in code. You can then add in your own stylings on top of this. You can reference the class that is created in Bootstrap in a CSS file and add your own stylings. But the challenge is that Bootstrap is kind of picky in that it likes its own stylings best. And so you occasionally have to pass in like a tag. I think it's like important with an exclamation part on the end. And it will say like it'll override Bootstrap stylings. If you're struggling with that as well, you can also do inline styling, kind of the same way we did for like color box or something. You know, when you pass it into the actual tag, you should be able to get like a style component inside of your tag here. And typically inline styling will override Bootstrap. Again, if it doesn't, you may have to just pass that important tag. To remember what that exactly, I have a note about it somewhere. But let's just Google. Yeah, so exclamation point first and then important. I said that backwards. But like referencing the class, adding your own styling, and then passing that important tag can help override Bootstrap. So Bootstrap it's some people love it, some people hate it. It's a way to get styles implemented quickly, but you do have to fight it a little bit if you're wanting to make it your own, because it just comes out of the box working the way that it does. But it's very handy because you can just go and plug in a bunch of stuff. You can do, let's look at their navbar options. So you can you get a bunch of like things, including like drop downs, which can be kind of challenging to code on your own, but are kind of nice to have. And then it's just all of the code for that. So I don't know, let's just take this giant one. I'll just get rid of my H1. It's not really serving me any purpose. Now I can have that nav and then I can just go in and modify it. So if I'm like, well, I don't really care about, where's that disabled one? Like, I don't need a disabled link. So I can just delete the entire LI that's associated with it. And then it's gone. And then I would just go in and actually create the links. You can see when I clicked that drop down that in my URL, it passed in a little hash mark. It's just waiting for me to fill in content there so that it can actually have something to drop down. So Bootstrap just requires this link, and then you just have to kind of plug and play with the code. Do you guys have any specific questions about Bootstrap?
Real quick, I just want to clarify, does Bootstrap automatically do responsive designs, or you still have to add the media queries in? I forget.
It's pretty good about being responsive. Yeah, look, it dropped to hamburger.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, so you wouldn't have to worry about going over to CSS and doing your media queries. Yeah.
Yep.
That comes up a lot.
For sure. I mean, you know, depending on how much code you add, you may still have to like make breakpoints for like your own stuff, but I think Bootstrap.
As long as you file like their flex container syntax and all that, like it should automatically do all that. If you change anything or create your own container, that's when like you'll run into those issues.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. If you can like follow them, like you can make it work. It's just like when you're like, I don't want it to look like I just copied and pasted this code. I want it to look like mine, and then you have to fight with it a little bit. But sorry, go ahead, Drew.
How does this implement then to React Bootstrap?
Great question. Totally. So that's a good segue. I really, just as like to wrap up, I really like these, like some of these cards. I feel like for like projects in particular, that's a great place to like have a little, you can do like a snapshot of your code or of like the front of your, you know, like the user facing view, and then like a quick description and a link to your GitHub. Like I feel like that's a very approachable way, and you can line up these cards, and Bootstrap's pretty good about dropping them appropriately as well, which is great when you need to change your viewport. Okay, so let's talk about the React version of this. So I spun up a little, nope, I wanted to be in that portfolio. I spun up a little React app. It's just nothing but boilerplate code. And so the React version of Bootstrap is called Reactstrap. Not GitHub. Oh yeah, that's fine. Because it's React, you have to do some installs for the dependencies. They use npm on their docs. I've always used Yarn, and that's what we use for our projects. If you're going to deploy, you need to like pick a path and do one or the other. If you end up with mixing npm and Yarn, when you go to deploy, you're going to get like conflicts over that. So let me double check the Yarn commands. So these are the setups that you need to do if you're using Yarn and to add Bootstrap. So you are adding, or to get Reactstrap. So Reactstrap is just running on top of Bootstrap. So you have to add both. One, you're just adding that base code, basically the same way that we did the install or like the link in the head. But then you add Reactstrap as well, which gives us access to sort of both layers. So in the terminal, I'll do Yarn add Bootstrap. And then we'll do Yarn add Reactstrap. And then the import is in your index JS. So inside of source, inside of index.js, where we don't typically hang out too much, we can add this import. Which I believe is on the docs right here. So you're adding in your index.js this line of code. Their npm commands just require, or like just install differently, but it's still the same version of installing both Bootstrap and Reactstrap. All right, that's loading. So once these load, you have access to the code in the same way that we do in regular Bootstrap. And add Reactstrap. But they come, rather than in like just code chunks, they come in components. So let's look at a Jumbotron version in Reactstrap. That's all I get. One, right? Fair. So I have to import the components in my file here. So bring in Jumbotron and button. And then this is like the full example of an entire component. We really only just need the code that's in the Jumbotron. Pop that into our React fragment. And so because we're bringing this in, it's components that we are giving access to through that import in both app or index.js and the dependencies that are now a part of our project through the yarn adds. Then we get access to Reactstrap components. And so Jumbotron and button just basically act like the components that we would import if we made a local component as well. And so you'll see that these tags, they still open and close, which looks a little different than our local components, but they're uppercase because they are essentially a class that we're bringing in. And again, you can just go in and change whatever you want with that. But when we fire up our app, should see our Jumbotron here eventually. Whenever it's ready, but the same kind of thing applies. So you're still just picking out the code that you want. And again, you can go delete lines if you don't care about, the button here, you just have to find it and delete it. It can also be helpful to, bring in all of the code, see what it looks like, delete what you don't want. But when you're going to delete the things you don't want, you can always inspect your page and see like really what tags are taking up which space. If you end up with a lot of Reactstrap or Bootstrap code, inspecting your page can be really helpful. Come on up. Cool, there we go.
Super helpful. I think my only other question about portfolios and React specifically is Do you recommend making one giant page or multiple kind of sectioned off pages?
Like from your user's perspective?
Yeah.
For right now, I would say I think a page is just going to be easier. React in its like essence is a single page application, or an SPA for short, where it renders multiple components, but it really only renders a single view. And so there's a third-party package that everybody uses called React Router DOM that allows for routing between pages, but React doesn't like innately do that. And so you can go and install that, and we're going to do that when we get to that phase. But unless it's just something that you absolutely need for your functionality of your portfolio, I think starting in a single page React app is a good way to go. You can still create navigation to link to different sections that your user doesn't immediately see. And you can create like if you have like a parallax scrolling or something, it can kind of like be a cool effect of dropping them down to different points, and it'll almost look like a navigation view. But I feel like starting there is good, and then always adding on.
Cool. Okay.
I think like scoping wise, that makes more sense to me right now.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool. And you obviously nobody has to use Bootstrap if it's something that you want to try and do and make a nav bar or anything else like that by hand. There is ways to do that in just regular HTML and CSS. One of the things that there's all my code. This little example here has a list for navbar that is actually like getting converted into like a navbar just using CSS. And I'm happy to like walk through how that works with anyone who's interested, but I feel like if Bootstrap can provide you something that works for now, that's an easier approach. But if anyone is really just dying to do this by hand, I'm happy to talk about that and how you make it responsive. But I feel like that would be more of a case-by-case basis. What else can we talk about for portfolios? Let me look at what was on my list that you guys gave me. I guess mainly we're talking about Bootstrap in both languages. Is anyone having any specific blockers on their portfolio that they want to talk about?
I guess knowing what I'm allowed to put under skills right now. Kind of a weird topic.
For sure. Well, I think you have. It would be a fun discussion for you guys to all like contribute what you think your skills are at this point, because I mean, really there is a lot. Like we've dealt with a lot of different types of languages and a lot of different types of technologies, and even just all of the side stuff that we use, and like text editors and whatnot can still be a skill. I feel like Brian probably has a really nice breakdown of this, but in my opinion, breaking out, like keeping languages and frameworks kind of wrapped into one category is helpful, because there'll always be people who will argue like, what's a library versus a framework versus a language? And like, do you put HTML in your portfolio? Because if you're a web developer, of course you know HTML and stuff like that. And I just feel like, list it. If it's running through any kind of automated system where they're scanning and doing like matching, just list it. But looping those together into one category can kind of help you from like getting nitpicky about, well, really, where does active record live in this whole list of things? Like, where is that? Is that its own language? Is it the ORM under Rails? Like, whatever, just list them all together. And then other types of technologies. I mean, even the fact that like we use Slack and Zoom very like dependently, like we operate with them every single day, and we know the kind of ins and outs of all of those things. If people are still trying to figure out a virtual environment or have never worked in a virtual environment, you're going to be able to provide a lot of context. I met with the project manager from Notch 8 like a week ago because she's like, we use Zoom, but I have no idea how to use all of the features like breakout rooms. And so she's like, can I like ask you like how to do this? I was like, yeah, because that's literally what we do every day. So I still think it's worth noting that even though it feels very like every day to us, it's still a skill set that not a lot of people have. And even just like look back through the syllabus and look at like all the stuff we've done and list it. Is there anything else that you're curious about that we didn't cover, or any like specific blockers that anyone has? Okay. I feel like that was a productive day all in all. Cool.
We can at least go finish the challenge from earlier today, so that's nice.
Totally. And that's a good one to just check back in with whenever you want to do a little bit more studying on these concepts. So, all right.